Hey, this is part two of chapter 19. Actually, Mr. Klein just walked in the room, interrupting me. But lucky for you, gets split up now. So, anyway, we were talking about Potosi. So, this is a very important, so economically, then, and also human environment interaction, and also economic labor systems. But, because they need these piles of silver, I mean, this is like you can't equate it to anything today. I mean, Spain finding this store of silver. Think of what they need. They need the gold and the silver, especially to buy luxury items. And also, what we haven't covered yet is mainland Europe. And then it's not just the luxury items. I mean, that's a huge part of it, but it is war. The European empires right now are so intensely competitive, and Spain is constantly going to war against other nations or struggling against other nations in Europe. And so, they need this cash. They need the cash. And so this is like a massive treasure that they're finding. And the silver then that's being pulled from Potosi, like that obviously is like bad, dangerous work, hugely labor intensive. And so this is what they're going to use forced labor for. So there's a couple different ways, like full on slavery and chattel slavery, which will begin, but also they adopt and incorporate the Inca Mita. And so this is like two of the major ways that they have workers that are doing this very dangerous and labor intensive work. Also, sugar. And we're going to talk about sugar even more in the next era, but these sugar plantations. So, sugar is becoming a luxury item as well and is newly introduced into European diets. And I'm like, people are dying for the sugar that they're able to grow on the sugar plantations. It is one of the most dangerous agricultural jobs and a very high death rate. The average life expectancy, I want to say, was like 23 years of age for the slaves that were shipped over to work on the sugar plantations. And so these are two of the economic activities that are helping Spain find their cash and get rich. So it's important for you to process and understand ways in which Spain carried out its economic goals, and this idea of forced labor and is important. Like it always comes up. So do make sure you understand the little differences then between encomienda, the mita, which you should already know because we've talked about that, the labor tax, the hacienda, which would just be a land estate. So let's say I was a conquistador and I did a good job, like my mission was successful, and I might be granted a hacienda then, and I would be given permission to like hold possession of that land, and then it would be like the peasant system in which I would have low wage agricultural workers. Just a review and to remember that mercantilism is the way, right? So we've talked about the goal of accumulating the gold and the silver, but also remember it's that strict control of imports and exports. And so what Spain will do, what even England and France are doing, is they're trying to limit other people from coming into port. So for example, like Spain's not going to let other people into their ports of trade or let other merchants from other countries come in and access the sugar or the silver or their other goods that they're pulling out of these colonies. Even later on, tobacco. So they're going to pull these natural resources out, ship them back to Spain. If anything can be processed, then that's where it'll be processed and then resold. In the Caribbean, we see mostly sugar plantations and haciendas. There's a little map there that you can see different little territories here. And then the Spanish coins, this pieces of 8, this becomes like the American dollar today. It became the legal tender. Like they're pulling so much silver, minting these coins that this becomes the new, global currency of the era. You could trade in Spanish pieces of 8 all over the world. Also, side note, where we get our dollar sign, if you merge the two pillars together. This is just a review then, again, just to remind you that agriculture is the major activity, although mining is very important. It's not the main activity, and just how they're actually accomplishing that. The companies that are doing all the mining, again, they're kind of contracting under the direction of the crown. And so what the crown will do, or the king and queen, is they'll say like, hey, whatever you mine out, we get 1/5 of all that silver. And so that's a pretty good deal for the Spanish crown because they don't have to then make the initial investment, yet they get all the rewards. The colonies then, they're living isolated from the mother country. And really the goal then becomes self-sufficiency, because it'd be better for these colonies if they don't have to try to import all these items. And so they're trying to develop then any little industry of items that they would consider essential. So like whether it would be like cloth industry or especially like food self-sufficiency. Any finished products though, if you're taking the raw resource of like wool and then spinning it into cloth, that's really expensive because you have to get it from the mother country and like they're going to process it and upcharge it. So they're really kind of informally trying to figure out ways that they can be self-sufficient without having to buy back. So the consequences of wealth. Hey, what's so bad about money? Well, actually, there are some negative consequences. So ironically, Spain and Portugal do not become incredibly rich. They should. They should. I mean, like with the silver mine, and if we think about it, like if you just like saved it and invested it, but most of the silver is flowing out for a couple things. One is war, other is luxury items. And so it really is like, you hear the stories of people that win the lottery and they go broke. And Spain and Portugal are much the same way. Remember, they kicked out in the Reconquista a lot of the educated people, so they don't have that resource. They have this huge debt then to pay off. And when the silver mines dry up, which of course they are, then they essentially are left. I mean, if you think about this, they're like actually going back in time. Like they essentially are left with medieval Europe in their new colonies, in the sense like it's just a feudal agricultural system. So where are you, Spain? You've lost in war. You spent all your silver. Now you're going to fall behind in terms of power. You're not going to be conquered, but they're going to end up falling behind the other European empires. I want to go back to that. Also, like Portugal is going to get beat out then by other surging European empires. So when we swing back to the mainland next unit, we'll explore this a little bit more. But like Portugal is going to lose a lot of its ports in India in particular, and then also on certain islands in the East Indies to the Netherlands. We're going to talk about social classes. This is a main, huge topic. So you got to really focus. You have to understand this stuff. So first of all, society in the colonies. This is a complete restructuring of society, unlike any event we've seen so far in world history, because of the amount of dying that's going on. There's a couple things that are impacting this. First off, for the first, 100, 150 years, European women are not immigrating. I'm not going over there if I'm a woman living in Europe. Are you kidding me? A dangerous, dangerous journey across the ocean, lack of sanitation, bad living conditions. I mean, no European woman wants to go over there. You have to think about also who is immigrating from Europe over to the Americas. These are men without land, jobs, and opportunities. Not the kind of guys you want to marry, ladies. So women are not immigrating with these men by and large. The Spanish men then are integrating and having relationships with Native women in the Americas. And sometimes this is done formally. There are actual marriages that will take place between Spanish men and local Native women. Sometimes it's just informal relationships where they're having relationships and bearing children with women who are not their wives. And so it happens on both levels. You have to understand the new social classes in Spain. It's going to reshape the Americas, and it's going to kind of start to reflect some of the struggles and tensions when we have these like preconceived ideas about race. The castas. These are the new social classes that are based on race. Okay? We're going to talk about some sensitive topics here, and I need you to understand that we have some terms that are used in a historical context that we no longer consider them, they're not used in today's discussion or topic, but they are a term that Spain used at that time to classify people. And so we do need to work to understand them. I'm sorry, the slide is such a long one. So first of all, at the top of society are the peninsulares. You need to know those by name. Peninsulares are Spanish-born, full-blood Spanish people. They are at the top of society. Next are the Creoles. I need you to star these people in your mind. They are Spanish-born. Both parents are Spanish, but they're born in the Americas, automatically slightly lower rank. Kind of weird, right? Next, we have classes of blended races and mixed race. And so these are the terms, again, that I said that we just use them to describe Spanish terms for them, but we don't use them anymore. So mestizo and mulatto are words that, so mestizo would be a blending of Spanish and Native American, and mulatto would be mixed race between an African, people of African descent, and then European descent. African slaves, full-on African slaves, then existed at the bottom of society. It's very important that you understand that this is how society is organized, and these are the social classes. And so what makes you important in New Spain? It's your racial genes, and then it's also where you were born. And so these are really arbitrary, kind of random human labels that are used to categorize and rank people. Many, many times, native people, such as the Incas, some of these original nobles were allowed pretty high ranking in local communities because they would help organize labor and help Spain accomplish their goals. The Catholic Church played a huge role in shaping society in the New World. Many of the priests came over, not all of them. We talked initially about like De las Casas being a conquistador, but most of the Catholic priests that come over, they are from these special schools within Catholicism that are really focused on service and education. So they're really coming with the very best intentions of like educating and helping Native American people, specifically the Jesuits, Dominicans, and Franciscans. And so they call it the mission. And this mission was a church, but the mission was the heart of the town. And this is where they're providing healthcare, education, training, and trying very hard to help natives assimilate into the new reality of living in a conquered society. Political structure. So how do they do this? Here's what it's important for you to understand. The political structures are like this. They are taking Spanish forms, so things that people have been doing in Europe, and they're transferring them over to the New World. So things like bureaucracy, things like a court system, and this is how they're organizing political power. It's always a struggle. They're across the ocean. How do you really maintain control of these, colonies, essentially, being so far removed? And it was difficult. It was always very difficult. But by and large, the expectation was that Spanish law was to be incorporated and followed. And then local laws were allowed to be passed and enforced. And justice then, they had a court system to which, you could apply any of these local laws on top of Spanish laws, and that's how they handled disputes. At the top, and you need to know these by name, there's a viceroy. This would be like a governor. And commanderos would be Spanish feudal lords. Judges and the judicial system was a very, very important part of organization. The judges were almost always Spanish-born, and either a Peninsulary or a Creole, and often, sometimes even the priests, they would be sent by the crown. Spanish workers then would be next. Native nobles would then could have some impact and some power locally. And this is how they tried to carry out rule of law and justice and organization. So it's important for you to understand the organization that's following some European forms, but it's very much based on like nobility and privilege by the crown. It's not merit-based. So when we talk about a bureaucracy, this isn't like you're taking an exam and then if you do really well, nope. This is just blood, connections, and approval by the crown. And the rest of the slide summarizes that. Courts of law, for some reason, like the courts in this whole system has like come up on the AP exam a couple different times. So I guess it's a pet topic, but really This is how they're trying to stay organized and provide law and order. And you have to, I mean, if you think about it, they're starting from scratch. So it's really important then that they have a really firm fix on rules and law so that everybody falls into place and you have societal unity. Remember that the law is always going to favor Spanish born, specifically peninsulares. The cities, however, take on an American feel. So this would be an example of the blending here where like that whole idea of a gridded city like the Aztecs had, the Spanish adopt that and they're like, yes, that's awesome. We're going to use that. And what we see then is we have these like beautiful, well-formed cities that the Spanish are building and they're replicating what they're seeing in from the American cities. So the elites are living in the cities, they're interacting with native nobles, and then we have the surrounding areas where we have these haciendas and agricultural estates. And even further out, then we would find the mining operations. And then in more remote locations, and that is more actually in the Caribbean and further north where it's more tropical, the sugar plantations. So here's some questions that you can think about, like how life changed for Native Americans, especially the Great Dying, being subjugated to forced labor systems, and then also losing social standing. The significance of the castas, okay, is that we have this new organization of society by race, and people are ranked and grouped based on their genetic genes, based on the ethnicity of their parents, and then also where they're born, and this whole ranking and hierarchy as a result of that. The church was largely a social organization and cultural tool where they're trying to provide education and assimilate Native people that are living in these new colonies. The demographic changes, you need to speak about the extreme loss of population of Native populations, also the immigration patterns. So we see initially just this huge influx of Spanish men that are looking for economic opportunity and really very few women. And as a result then, this growing new society then of mixed races. Later on, so this is over 100 years, then we start to see more immigration of European women and Spanish women to the American colonies, but it's going to take some time, and that will definitely have impact on society and more societal change and shifting in classes. You know, we don't want to skip over because we are going to spend a short amount of time talking about the arrival of African slaves, but you cannot skip over the European practice then of trying to solve this question of like how do we have this like cheap labor to pull these natural resources out. It's extremely dangerous work, and African slaves then and exploiting the African slave trade was the answer that a lot of these European nations turned to at first. And the forced migration, so we have to talk about that these people from Africa who even though like they might have been traded at first or captured by, neighboring tribes within Africa or neighboring kingdoms within Africa, they are being traded then outside of their own country and forced against their own will, in which, as you guys know, I'm pretty sure you've studied the triangular trade, just like the most horrific conditions, separated from their families and, shipped like not humans, in the most horrific conditions, and then being used as expendable human beings to accomplish the labor goals. So, slavery is going to become a topic in the next era because the inhumanity of it and questioning of it is going to start to grow. And so the answer of how do we achieve our labor goals is going to start to shift and change as people start to oppose the practice of slavery because of the brutality and the immorality of it. Make sure that you can discuss economic systems and activities that are going on that you understand is mostly agricultural, what they're growing in New Spain, mostly just ag products, and then sugar especially. Sugar is great for Spain to sell for cash because not only do people want sugar, but if you are going to make alcohol and rum, then sugar is necessary for that as well. Tobacco, I want to bring that up. Tobacco is being grown around the Caribbean. However, it's going to kind of grow and develop a little bit more in southern United States. So still, I would put it up there with one of the crops, but not the major crop of New Spain. Primary crop of the Caribbean and Brazil, that's question number 3 there. That's where you should be able to identify the sugar plantations in particular are in those areas. Well, that was a quick tutorial. It's really important that you understand the details. So anything that's in this presentation, you have to understand the details of it. I've kind of whittled it down to the most important points, and really crucial that you polish up. You have to know all the social classes by name. You need to know all the forced labor systems by name and exactly how they're similar and how they're different and which forced labor method is used where. I hope that helps, and good luck.